Hi, this is Brian. Am I off mute now? No. Hmm. Hello, this is
Hi,
Brian.
Brian. We can all hear you.
Hi.
Yeah, we can all hear you.
Oh, good.
And if you look in the chat box,
I'm
we
on my
can type to
phone.
you too.
Okay. Right now I'm having problems finding the chat box. Um, um, yeah, this just got all messed up for me on the computer. Sorry. I'm gonna re-log. Oh, there's the chat box. I'm using the phone, not the computer audio. Should I put my screen on?
We can
Let's
all
see
see
what's.
your screen. Yeah.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? Then you're looking at all my emails.
No longer. We can no longer see your screen, but we were just seeing it.
Okay, hold on 1 second and let me get the right thing up here. There's my screen, and let me find my PowerPoint, and let me play from start. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And do you see the chat stuff that's there, or you see the full screen?
We see the full screen, Brian.
Okay. Okay. Great. Sorry for that delay. Angie, do you want to get us get us started, or should I just jump in?
Go ahead and jump in, Brian. We're ready for you.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for those technical delays. And welcome to our webinar on leveraging the California School Dashboard and LCAPs to strengthen school climate. We're excited to have you on board for this webinar and hope that it'll be very helpful to you. Let's see. Well, since it was enacted in 2013, the local control funding formula has offered great opportunities to improve school climate, both because school climate is one of 8 state priorities in the LCFF statute that must be addressed in every local control and accountability plan with goals, actions, and expenditures each year. But also now this year with the inclusion of suspension rates as one of the few state indicators in the newly released California School Dashboard and school climate surveys as a local indicator as well. So in light of all of that, we're excited to have a number of people on available today to talk about the impact that the LCAPs and the California School Dashboard are having on school climate, both from a statewide perspective and also from local levels. So today you'll hear 3 presenters. The first is myself, which is Brian Lee I'm the California State Director of Fight Crime Invest in Kids. And afterwards, you'll hear from 2 different perspectives from advocates from Northern and Southern California. And those are Tobias, who's an organizer with Californians for Justice, and also Laura Kanter, who's the Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Youth Programs with the LGBT Center OC. That's Orange County. With that, we will get going now on that presentation. So as I mentioned, I'm the first speaker, and what I'm going to be doing is looking at our statewide analysis that we have of school climate in the 2017-18 LCAPs of the 50 largest districts across California. Now you might wonder, why is a group called Fight Crime Invest in Kids care about school discipline and school climate? We are an organization, state and national, of about 400 California police chiefs, sheriffs, district attorneys, and crime victims. And we're focused on evidence-based strategies that keep kids away from crime, which ranges from preschool and child abuse and neglect prevention programs to after-school programs and other dropout prevention programs, including school discipline reform strategies. Our national organization has over 5,000 members. And here in California, we've been active since 2011 on the school climate issue and helped lead what's known as the Fixed School Discipline Policy Coalition, which is a coalition of over 30 organizations, local and statewide advocacy organizations that have been working through legislation and the budget and through information sharing to advance alternative strategies to suspensions and expulsion, with a lot of success here in California, where we've seen suspension rates fall, the suspensions themselves fall 46% over the past 5 or so years. Of course, the reason is why do law enforcement leaders care about school discipline reform? And simply, some of it is just that if kids are not in school, it's better to have kids in school than unsupervised and on the streets. But it's not just that common sense idea, but it's also the idea that if you look at the research, it shows how big a risk factor suspension rates are. New research that just was released this year compared students who had been suspended with similar students and looked at them for 12 years after their suspension, and then controlled for 60 different variables. What they found is, when you're looking at similar youth, except for the fact that they were suspended youth were 30% more likely to be arrested once over those 12 years, and 50% more likely to be arrested more than one time. So we really do see a link showing that suspended students are more likely not only to drop out, but also turn to crime. So that's why this is such an important issue to our membership, and why we've focused over the years on how is it being addressed. So this is our third analysis of LCAPs. In the fourth year we've seen LCAPs. We took off last year, so we're comparing a lot 2015-16. But this is an important one, not only because as the years go by, we're seeing just LCAPs being more refined, but also this is the first one where the new California School Dashboard, our new report cards, are being used, and tied to that, performance standards have been established. It used to just be that districts were expected their LCAPs to come up with their own goals for how much they would reduce suspension rates or improve graduation rates or increase test scores, and they were then held, their communities were to hold them accountable for that. But there was no real statewide standard of where were you supposed to be, where were you supposed to get to. But with the California School Dashboard and the related performance standards, that has changed. So it was exciting to look at it this year. Now, that California School Dashboard, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is based on a color system. And those colors kind of come from two things. And here we're looking at the colors for suspension rates for a unified school district. It looks at both what's your suspension rate this year, we call that the status, and how much has it changed compared to the past year. And you look at that together, and it yields the color. So, for example, if you had a median suspension rate, let's say about 3%, and you declined by 1%, the year before you were 4%, so in other words, you went from 4 to 3, you would alas be a green. So this combination of your current year and how you change from year to year, that's what yields these color schemes. So that's something that everyone's been looking at as they've been preparing their LCAPs for this year. Now, what are the performance standards? It's not as simple, of course, as we would think, because it has this color-coded scheme. But the general idea has been that districts and schools, which also have these report cards, should strive to get to green. And the only way to really get to green and stay there for sustained time is to get to what's considered a low suspension rate, and then really maintain that. And those low suspension rates are relatively low, with 1.25% for elementary school districts, 2.5% for unified school districts, and 3.5% for high school districts. By comparison, I believe that the statewide rate right now is 3.6%. So the low rate is, trying to get does move the ball a bit. So those are the performance standards that we're seeing that are now being applied. importantly, is California has set up this school dashboard, this report card, and every state's had to do something like this because of the federal ESSA law. California is unique, is one of the very few states, just one of three, that has a distinct indicator for suspension rates. The federal law said you had to have the typical graduation rates and test scores, but you also had to have one other indicator of school quality or success, and that is the opportunity where things like suspension rates or chronic absence or college and career readiness have stepped in. California actually is trying to do all three of those, although it's only required to do one extra thing under federal law. But because of the way the LCFF law works, there's also a need to do a bit more than just the federal law requires, arguably. So it's a big deal. It's unique that California is actually targeting suspension rates and making that something that schools are going to be graded on, and that grade, that color, all ties into whether or not they're called out for a technical assistance and eventually intervention. So it has a lot of bearing. Now, I think that folks on this call have probably seen these examples, but just to remind folks, there's a lot of different ways you could look at the dashboard, because you can look at a lot of different windows. The most basic one is this, and this is an example for Sac City Unified. What it does is show the 7 different indicators and the color that you get for that, which corresponds with some Trivial Pursuit-sized wedgies. And then also to the right has the total number of student groups that you have, subgroups, race, ethnicity, low income, et cetera, and how many of those have particularly low colors, orange, and red. So here you see suspension rate in Sac City. They got an orange for that, and that there are 13 student subgroups. 11 of them were in the orange or red. So they definitely faced a lot of challenges in Sacramento Unified. Now you can go down further and look at all these different subgroups. This is just page 1 of the subgroups for Sac City, and you can kind of look at for overall students and individual student subgroups, both the color they got, the number of students, and also the actual rate and the change from year to year. So it's very helpful to be able to see that. And then you can even go further, and this is only part of the page. It's missing the very high 5th column on it. But you can look at I'm sure this is really too small to read, but the general idea is for each district, you can look at every single school and see where they fall, what color, and what was the combination of status and change that led them to that color. You could also do something similar with each of the different groups of race and ethnicity. So there's a lot of ways to slice this, to see, get a sense of how the school district is performing, how individual populations are performing, how individual schools are performing. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the first time that we've had the school dashboard integrated into the LCAPs, the Local Control and Accountability Plans. And they actually changed the Local Control and Accountability Plan template this year to specifically evoke the school dashboard and make you respond, make you cross-check your dashboard and see what's going on. So the place where this comes up is in the plan summary, which is sort of an overall to the LCAP. It goes on top, a big plan summary, a number of things you have to address. One is your greatest needs and one is your performance gaps. So the greatest needs are that if there's any category, such as suspension rates, where you have a red or orange overall for all students, then you have to identify that and say what you're going to do about it. Just as well for performance gaps, if you have any student subgroups that are 2 or more performance levels below your overall students, you have to call those out also and talk about how you're going to address that. So when we looked at the 50 largest districts this year in their 2016-17 LCAPs, 2017-18 LCAPs, we did find that by and large they did what they needed to do on the greatest needs and the progress gaps. 5 of the districts, 10%, had orange or red overall on suspension rates, and they admitted to it. and 31 districts had subgroups performing 2 levels below overall or more, and of those 31, 29 of them did call it out. So a couple in Riverside County did fail. I believe it was Riverside County. Maybe it was one San Bernardino and one Riverside, but they did fail to call out the subgroups. So by and large, people are taking a close look at those dashboards and including data from that in the summary in their LCAP. So that is a positive step. The challenge is that that we still say that there's some there's some things that can be improved. One thing that can be improved is that it's great to call out the subgroups, noticing which subgroups are underperforming, but that only goes so far. The key is, okay, what are you going to do about it? And part of what you're going to do about it is hopefully set goals for how that subgroup is going to improve. But the problem is we saw that only 40% of those that called out subgroups actually had goals for those subgroups. So that's the minority of them. So they kind of, even though they say we're not doing so well with, say, African Americans or low-income students, they don't say, and these are our goals for how to improve that population. So, it's promising to see that in 40% of the districts, but there's a ways to go. The next thing that we see is that more than a third of districts do this. Just because you only have to report subgroups that are performing 2 or below, districts are free to report other subgroups if they're concerned that they're underperforming. If you're yellow overall, you have orange for some subgroups, you don't have to call them out, but it might be something that's helpful because that's a population that you really need to focus on, and it would be good to identify those. Third, since everything's based on colors, it would be great as districts establish year-to-year goals for suspension rate reduction, for them to say not just we're going to go from 5% to 4.5% to 4% to 3.5%, but for them to say, and this year by going from 5 to 4.5, that means, for example, and I'm not sure if this is right, we'd go from yellow to green. So it would be great to see that, but we're also seeing that not nearly enough districts are doing that as well. Finally, LCAPs are district level, and you're supposed to include goals and things for schools, but you're also allowed to have the same goals for every school. But the most detailed LCAPs for finding that districts are actually setting color goals for schools. They're saying, 50% of our schools were in green. We want to get to 70% in year 1 and 80% in year 2. We found that only 2 of these 50 districts actually had goals for what their color ratings would be for schools, and only 20% of them, make any reference to the color performance of their schools. So there's certainly ways to integrate the dashboard more effectively into the LCAPs, and we've seen a number of districts, a minority of districts that are doing that, but we think that other districts could certainly learn from that. Next, some other things that we found in our analysis and things that we've looked at from year to year in the 3 years we've done these is an increased commitment to evidence-based practices like social emotional learning, positive behavioral interventions and supports, and restorative justice or restorative practices. Now we have 92% of the 50 districts including them. That's up from 70% the first year we looked at these. We also have more than half of these districts are saying that they're expanding their evidence-based practices. It's not always clear to what extent they're expanding them, but they do assert that they are. Also, we saw in a slew of districts, we just have a couple of examples here, districts that go out of the way to say, we're already using these alternatives and they're already making a difference. They're dramatically reducing suspensions and things like that. So it's exciting to see districts already saying that these alternatives really do make a difference. But we find that there's still, so that's all really good. At the same time, we find that there's room for improvement in how you address evidence-based practices. One thing is that funding level is unclear in half of the districts which have them. And that's a real problem. To really get a sense of how well you're doing things, you want to know how much money you're dedicating to it. An example, in San Diego Unified, they have $20 million for alternatives to suspension, but also for reducing class size by hiring more teachers. So we have no idea how much money there is really intended to or going to the alternatives to suspensions. And then also we see very differing levels of funding among these districts. And it gives us some suspicion because these are all large districts, the 50 largest in the state out of 1,000, that maybe some of them aren't really doing nearly as robust a job on these alternatives as others. So as you can see, 10 of them are dedicating $100,000 or less, while 8 of them are, up in, close to or well into the millions of dollars that they're putting into these. Now, a few other things that we noticed as well on evidence-based practices is that oftentimes as you look at their updates in the LCAP, what they did in the current year as opposed to what they promised to do, that a lot of times they're spending less than they intended. More than half the districts did that, and of those, more than half of those reported underspending by at least $300,000. There may be some circumstances that led to that, but it does raise some concern that we're not seeing as much spending as they originally intended. And of course, spending itself is not the answer. It's successful implementation, but the money certainly can help with that successful implementation. A few other things to point out. We kind of looked at suspension rate goals because you're supposed to come up with year 1, year 2, and year 3 goals for what your suspension rates will be. And we found a mix of some were ambitious and some weren't so ambitious. For example, on the ambitious side, we found that if half the districts that got a yellow for all students established goals that would get them to green within 3 years. So that's good because they would be changing colors and getting to that green, which is the real goal. At the same time, we saw a number of other districts that weren't so ambitious. 5 of the districts already had a green, but it turns out their goals were so unambitious that they would actually downgrade to yellow if they merely met their goals. Of the districts that had an orange overall, only 1 of those, 25%, actually had a goal to improve their color to yellow or beyond within 3 years. And then some of them were already meeting their multi-year goals by 2015-16. So this was a 2017-18 LCAP, Kern Union and Santa Ana, who you'll hear about in a little bit. So again, definitely, we hope to see ambitious goals because we know that, especially with a lot of subgroups, there's very high suspension rates. So when they're already meeting their goal, it raises concerns because we feel like they should be able to go further. Another thing that we saw that we worry about could be a negative impact of having the dashboard is that much fewer districts were actually providing current year data, like data in 17-18, for how they were doing on their suspension rates. And they're supposed to be looking at the LCAP and saying, hey, what did we promise to do with 17-18? How much did we promise to spend? Where did we promise to land in outcomes? And if they aren't even looking at their 17-18 rates, then they aren't really providing the answers they need to provide. And the last time we looked at this, about half of the districts had current year data, but this time only 30% did. And our concern is the dashboard is a little bit behind, but a lot of times they might just think, oh, we had a yellow on the dashboard this year, this was the rate, now it's from like a year and a half ago, and they may not feel a need to have current year data. So we think that that's a problem, and they really should have that current year data. Finally, moving to the local indicator, and that's something that's also in the dashboard, and you're supposed to provide some data related to it, but it's not as clear as what it is. The other ones, like the state, actually can fill in the data for you because suspension rates and test scores are available at the state level. But you're supposed to have school climate surveys on safety and connectedness. We found, though, that 20% of the 50 largest districts have no goals on climate survey outcomes, and that hasn't changed since we looked at things a few years before. But we also found that 8 of those districts had actually gone backwards. Before, they used to have goals on safety and connectedness, as the LCAP statute requires, but then they kind of went backwards. And part of that we see in a few places. We wonder again, does the dashboard incentivize people in the wrong direction? Because we find that the dashboard now just says all you have to do is say that we conducted a survey every other year and report some findings, it doesn't talk about the goals, but the LCFF statute still says you're supposed to set goals on safety and connectedness from year to year. So we would certainly like to see more specific goals, more often see goals themselves on climate surveys. We feel that they are required. But then also, it's important to have them both on safety and connectedness. And we found that only 50% of districts have goals on both of those. And the LCFF statute talks about not just student surveys, but parent and staff surveys. But only about a quarter of all districts have survey outcome goals for all three of those populations, and only half of those have goals on both safety and connectedness for all three populations. So there's still a ways to go on the school climate surveys. So that kind of finally just leads us to, as you as district officials or advocates are looking at what you might want to advocate for based on our analysis, a few things about us. On suspension reduction goals, we'd recommend that you push for subgroup level goals for different race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, English learner, etc. That the goals should talk about not just the percent of the suspension rate, but also what color you'd be at each year. And you should have some school level goals as well. On the update, current year data should be included on suspension rates. On evidence-based practices, it's important to have dedicated, clear funding to know how much money is being proposed to go to PBIS or restorative practices or SEL. And also, the funding should be sufficient, and there should be sufficient detail about how it's being spent so you can really analyze, is it being effectively implemented. And finally, in climate surveys, we recommend having goals not just for safety, but also connectedness, and having surveys with those goals for students, parents, and staff. Here we have the link to our report, which is called Using the California School Dashboard and LCAP to Improve School Climate. We'll be making this PowerPoint and other PowerPoints available to you. And also, please feel free to write questions on the screen. Angie can explain if there's any lack of clarification about where to do that, and we can try to answer those along the way at the end of this presentation, or if we don't get to it during this presentation, we'll of course send out answers afterward, after the presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Albert with Californians for Justice to talk to us about their experiences in Eastside Union High School District in San Jose, California.
Thanks so much, Brian. And for the audience, you can enter your questions into the chat box, and we will try to forward those along to the presenters as we go, or at least at the end, see if we can get to those questions. And we can all see your screen, Albert. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brian, for the introduction. Give me 1 second. How do you go into presentation on slides? There you are. So yeah, for those of you who've never heard of Californians for Justice, I just want to start off. Californians for Justice, we're a statewide grassroots organization that's youth-led. And again, I'm Albert. I'm an organizer here in our San Jose office. I want to start off today kind of talking about what is the work that CFJ is doing that's kind of taking us to leveraging school climate and LCAPs. Right now, our campaign is called Relationship-Centered Schools. And we define like a relationship-centered school is one where all members of our school community feel like they belong, are valued, are empowered to learn and lead together. Relationship-centered schools unite social and emotional learning with academics to ensure all students reach their full potential regardless of race or zip code. So this has been like our campaign. We're on year 2, and here in the East Side, really, last year we were able to pass a resolution in which the district committed to a multi-year implementation phase to create schools that invested in staff, valued student voice, and created space for relationship building. And so they were going to start that off of 3 pilot schools. So that's really where we are with that campaign. And like many other organizations, we're sticking with it through an implementation phase. And so one of the strategies we're kind of using here at CFJ to make sure that happens is we're using a capacity building strategy. And so we're really partnering with districts on the ground to provide them with technical support and help them build their engagement process for LCAP, as well as running some learning networks through CCE, but also independently that some of our districts are joining. So for us, the question is, how do we use the strategy that we're already employing to make sure that relationship-centered schools becomes a reality? And we really see LCAP as that vehicle for ensuring that it stays and becomes a reality. So making sure that relationship-centered schools is reflected in the LCAP was really important for us. So then it came to me, right, as a person working on capacity building, how do I build the capacity in Eastside to have an engagement process that's reflective of community priorities? So Californians for Justice, we developed this engagement framework with our partners, families, and schools. And our framework really has like 4 areas: equitable stakeholder engagement, leadership development, shared decision making, and accountability and transparency. So when we're working with districts, we really want to make sure that they're building up these 4 areas, right, to really develop strong engagement processes for their LCAP. And I think in the East Side, my work has been working with them in the last past years, we really leaned into like equitable stakeholder engagement. So making sure that the right people are at the table to give input when we're talking about LCAP and we're talking about target groups, right? And additionally, we really lean into shared decision making. So how are we building the spaces, right, for community to give input in a way that's meaningful, especially for East Side High School District. For those who don't know, being a high school district, right, the engagement level from parents or even students is, I think, 1 step removed. So how do we bring them into the fold, and what are the spaces that we're doing that into? Because for us, right, like when I say how are we going to leverage, you know, the LCAP and dashboard for school climate, I think from Californians for Justice perspective, it comes from our communities, because our communities know what's up, and when our communities are in the spaces that they need to give input and engagement that's meaningful, and provide recommendations, they could really level us up and bring up school climate. So what did that look like on the ground, and how did that manifest? I want to take us back to East Side High School District's LCAP engagement in 16-17. And they really had 3 large spheres of engagement, and they're highlighted as they did 12 site engagements. So they went to every comprehensive high school and had a meeting there. They did an LCAP survey, which had around 800 respondents. So for a district around 22,000 students, you're talking about a low response rate. And they started a pilot advisory committee program, really meeting at the last couple months of the district. So not much leverage in sense of making recommendations before the LCAP or March 15th, before any personnel changes could actually be made. And the East Side was also engaging stakeholder groups, but being as there's like a high school district, there wasn't many. Some of the main things though that really popped up that year and that we moved for, that helped us go into this year to leverage the LCAP and dashboard into improving school climate, I want to highlight their move to the goals. So East Side High School District moved from 3 goals in their LCAP to 5 goals that were aligned with the 5 high school indicators on dashboard. So that included, right, the suspension goal. And so not only did they move to these 5 new goals, but really the language aligned with our RCS campaign. So it allows us to even could get in a deeper wedge. So I just want to read you some of the goal language they provided, right? So for their graduation grades, their language was to provide the physical, emotional, and social and academic supports to ensure students are making appropriate progress towards high school graduation. So it's really highlighting that social emotional learning that we're pushing for, because we know school climate, you know, we always say like school climate happens in the classroom, happens in outside the classroom, right? And their suspension goal went a little bit further. It said they wanted to establish and sustain healthy school cultures through relationship-centered practices to keep students engaged in their learning environment. So this language is like really beneficial for us as far as coming into this year to wedge in more action items into the LCAP and to bolster up, right, that suspension. Some placeholders that were put into the LCAP that year, which is student advisory committees to look into school climate, and they set aside some monies to start doing some panorama surveys at the 3 early adapter, 3 early pilot schools that we're going to create relationship-centered schools, right? So we come into this year. East Side Union High School District in partnership, right, we built up this engagement process. Hold on, I just realized that. Oh, so it's working again? All right. So we grew their engagement process, right? So we see that they still have their three main spheres of engagement, right? The LCAP survey, their advisory committee on the district-wide level, their 12 site engagements, but they're adding a huge another layer of engagement for us, which was they added a student advisory committee. And I want to highlight that because when I talk about equitable stakeholder engagement in a high school district, right, students need to be at the table. When we talk about school climate, students need to be at the table. And not only do they need to be at a table, it needs to be in a non-tokenizing way. So it needs to be more than a 1 hour lunch meeting. So I really commend us, Eastside, and our partnership this year for creating 4 4-hour meetings, right? So 16 hours towards creating recommendations for the LCAP with an emphasis on school climate. That was like the directive that they like let us work in when we're creating and helping them build the student advisory committee. So, you know, it just goes into like a really deeper level of understanding. And so when they are building up their engagement process, you know, what is our community bringing up? I want to bring some of the leveraging that we were able to do. One of the main ways then that we started to kind of incorporate school climate through all levels of engagement, right, was in our site engagements to begin with. When Eastside Union High School District did their site engagements and we did it with them, we wanted to, again, continue to onboard our community to dashboard. And like Brian said, right, you're highlighting all the colors. And for Eastside Union High School District, they're, you know, I think they're in suspensions. They're like they are a orange, right? So when you're going to every site, we would bring out Chromebooks for all the participants. And when participants would log onto dashboard, suddenly, right, what's elevated to them is suspensions in school climate, right? So when they're looking at the LCAP summary and they're seeing under goal 4, right, suspensions, that there's like a smaller dollar amount than any other goal, when they make the recommendations where community voice is elevated, they're going to elevate suspensions as a high need. So that's really what came out of those 12 site engagements, right? Additionally, the school advisory committee, they worked to retailer the LCAP survey and added an additional 7 school climate questions, and they pulled those from Healthy Kids, from Panorama, from other ones that the district was using, right? Which ones they felt were most relevant to their experience as students. And with their help, right, we were able to increase the response of the LCAP survey from around 875 respondents to over 6,000 respondents, majority of which were students. And 51% of those students were from targeted groups, right? So what really came out of that, and again, what kind of a shift of a highlight of those school climate questions was the need to address unfair treatment or bias in discipline policies. So that came out of that survey and aligned with the suspension as being an academic indicator, the worst indicator, sorry, the lowest performing indicator on dashboard. And additionally, right, the district advisory committee as a whole was looking at all these different sets of data from dashboard to the recommendations made by the student advisory committee, right, to the site engagements and the survey, and they too elevated relationships between teachers and students as a need and an area for recommending in the LCAP process. So what were the outcomes of this whole year? Well, I actually haven't seen Eastside Union High School District's new LCAP. It's coming out this Friday, but I know that they're expanding Panorama. So for those of you who don't know, Panorama is a really comprehensive school climate survey. They're expanding it from the 3 high schools that they did it at this year to all 12 high schools. And that actually came around because people were like, well, what was like the implementation for like the 7 school climate questions that were done with the LCAP survey? So they definitely want to react to that and to other critiques that they have as far as school climate. They're also expanding some other projects like Project Hope, which is a gang intervention program, to like 5 high schools. They're actually going to do a huge push for admin and teacher training on unconscious bias. And so there's like a list of other action items that may come into the LCAP this year. I'm not too sure exactly what other action items will be reflected. Unfortunately, it's coming out Friday. But I think for us, like lessons learned as far as how do you work with a district in a capacity building mode to push site engagement, to push school climate, is, creating strong engagement creating a strong engagement process, including proper onboarding of our parents and students in governance, right, is crucial to moving recommendations that are reflective of community priorities, especially like for us here in San Jose, where we don't have a lot of outside community organizations that push for the district for change, right? In a district as large and an area as large as Eastside San Jose, we are like the only community organization that focuses on high schools. So that being said, right, school climate is leveraged in LCAP through strong community input, right? Our communities know what's up. All levels of our community highlighted school climate and suspensions as key and an area of focus for the East Side, right? So it's making sure that when we talk about how to leverage LCAP, we continue to ensure that we're making our community's voice present. And the input process needs to happen year round. It's not just at a hearing, right? So building momentum and building the knowledge of your engagement process happens throughout the whole year. It shouldn't happen at one meeting or one-side engagement or just starting in the spring. And for those, just like last thing, like building a partnership with the district is a multi-year process, and you have to identify key allies and champions, at least for us, with RCS and advocating for youth voice. And I think the next step for us here in San Jose is leading into those other areas of our engagement model. And so kind of creating what does the leadership development model look like for students and parents, right? Because a lot of our parents come from feeder districts and may not have been involved in their school, right? We kind of tend to lose people as they go into the high school. A lot of parents are less involved. So how do we develop our students to stay around for a multi-year process, right? As the LCAP is a multi-year plan so that they can continue to have that input and like that knowledge over the years. Yeah, thank you. I'll pass it over to Ryan.
Do people hear me? Because it's just unmuted. Oh, good. I'll pass on to Laura Kanter, who has been an advocate engaged in work in Santa Ana Unified District. So Laura, all to you. Yes, we have Laura's screen, but not Laura's voice.
Oh, okay.
Hello? You're there.
Okay, great. Thank you. So hi to everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I think my presentation is going to be a little bit different than everybody else's. So let me get it back up. All right, so I work for the LGBT Center here in Orange County, and we're located in Santa Ana, and we are part of Santa Ana Building Healthy Communities. And in 2011, we started organizing together with families, parents, youth, and other organizations. We focused on schools, education, and of course that was when there was a lot going on. So I was just going to give a quick history of what we did, and then I'm going to talk about some of how that's being implemented at this point and where we're headed. So like I said, we started in about 2011, and this there was a lot going on here, especially around detention and deportation. We had a lot of young people being deported, as well as ending up in the juvenile justice system as part of the school to prison pipeline. And of course, this is also when there was the beginnings of a lot more discussion around restorative justice practices, as well as understanding the impact of suspension and expulsions, especially on youth of color, LGBT kids, students with disabilities, and how these things were all connected. So we all were learning together, and then came the LCAP, which we were able to use kind of as our vehicle to focus on some of those priorities in the LCAP, including school climate. We also focused on parent and youth engagement. And just for a little background, Santa Ana is a largely Latino school district. Probably about 85% of the students are Latino. And of course, so the LCAP was very important to the youth here and to the families. We basically worked with Public Counsel, and we created our own 5-page school climate resolution. And if anybody wants to see that, I can actually send that. I have a bunch of documents that you'll be able to access as well. The school climate resolution was, like I said, 5 pages. And when we started advocating for the LCAP, we basically had to choose what was most important at the time. So we focused especially on restorative justice practices and we wanted more parent engagement and more support for parents, and safe and welcoming schools. And at the time, and I'm hoping that it gets changed this time, but we've been fighting to have them actually articulate LGBT students. But they did include a lot of those things that we did ask for in the first LCAP. We basically just had a massive campaign, parents and youth and organizers going to school board meetings, meeting with school leaders, superintendent, school board members, and we were pretty relentless. And we were able to get some of what we asked for in our in the LCAP in the beginning. So these are just some pictures. I think one of them is missing of some of the work we had. We did a lot of restorative justice practice training ourselves. We had parents, of course, learning about LCAP, learning about school advocacy, learning about school climate. We had community forums, and then we went to school board meetings and advocated at that level. And so we did succeed. I think we did a really good job in the beginning. We really contributed to the original LCAP in Santa Ana Unified School District. I think that we helped add language that made it a more caring LCAP, and it had things that we added, that we brought to the table that weren't in there, and they weren't in there until the very end, and we really fought for them. So on this slide, you can see some of the things and some of the money that was associated with it, but quite a lot of money for restorative justice practices and for welcoming and productive school environments, anti-bullying awareness, safe and sensitive schools. These are things that we fought for. And like I said, some of those things were not in the original LCAP, and we were able to get those things in there. The other thing that I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is this part of what we fought for in the LCAP. So we came up with this idea, and we're not the only ones who have had the idea, but we fought for this idea inside the LCAP. So I had mentioned that we created a resolution. So on the top of this screen, you can see it says Supportive Schools Climate Partnership Committee. So this is what we asked for. This is the language that we wanted, and that's in the italics. And then below, this is what it looked like when it came out of the LCAP. And this is just one of many, but I wanted to show you how our advocacy led to something inside the LCAP. In the bottom of it, you see it says expand school climate oversight committees. That didn't exist. I don't know if they had school climate committees before. We are not aware that they did. But our goal at the time, and when we were making the request, was that we wanted it to be an oversight committee to look at how school climate was faring in each of the schools in the district and how things were going. So that's back right in like 2013, 2014. And at that time, then they started the school climate committee, and we were part of it. So meaning we had parents, we had youth, we had our organizations. So all of the organizations that were part of the Santa Ana Building Healthy Communities education work group, we each had representatives on the school climate committee. And then on the school climate committee also, and attending our monthly meetings are a school board member. We have we have more than one assistant superintendent, but the assistant superintendent of school climate and culture, the executive director of pupil support services. So you can see here, this is the list of people who are part of the school climate committee. We have a principal from every school level, as well as an alternative school principal. We have a parent engagement coordinator, so you can see, and actually there are more people now, but this is like the foundation of who was part of that group. And we started meeting on a monthly basis. So this was very, very interesting in the beginning. It's still interesting because it's just this group of advocates and organizers and parents and youth, and now we went from basically advocating on the outside, going to school board meetings and having a campaign, to sitting down at the table with some of these school leaders. And it's been really challenging. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those challenges, and then some of the things that we've been able to do that have been, I think, pretty amazing, and then where we're headed. And so the things that have been challenges is like I said in the past, it's like, you know, we saw it as an oversight. We wanted to be a part of that. We wanted to have the youth and the parents especially, and some of the organizational representatives to really be able to get the information necessary from the district to find out, is their plan really working? Are they actually improving school climate? Are they doing the things that they said they would do in the LCAP? And what's the progress? That was, like I said, that was difficult because, you know, they were not very transparent. And I don't think that, and I think it's still taking time for them to really value the input of our group, although it feels like it's like an ebb and flow. Like sometimes it seems like things are going well, and other times it feels like they're not, that we're just going to these meetings and you know, making this district look good in a way, but is it really making a difference for the students? And the district was very proud of this work, very proud of the school climate committee. I'll show you a picture that they used, and they do promote that they have the school climate committee. So the question was, is this a dog and pony show, or is this something that, are they really valuing our input? Transparency wise, it's still difficult. We have a lot of what Brian talked about in terms of finding out about the details around funding and how much was actually spent on each specific thing, and where did the money go, instead of these big just kind of lump sums going into this list of things that includes nutrition and restorative practices. You know, that doesn't really help us. So we've been asking for that. And hopefully this next LCAP, according to the school climate assistant superintendent of school climate, we will be getting more of that information. So it's taken a couple of years, but we may be getting there. Suspension data still seems sometimes vague. Exactly, the data is not always like, are they in home, are they sending the kids home, are they in school suspensions? But we did receive at the very last meeting, so this was at the end of, I guess, our third year meeting together, and we'll start again in August. We did receive some information that I have shared here that you can see, that really broke down some suspension, at least by schools, by month. And that was very good for us to have. And ultimately, we'll be able to also look at this and compare this and some other data that we've been collecting to the dashboard and see how things line up. So those are some of the challenges, and I'll show you some photos of things. Let me skip back. Let me skip to this. So, and then I'll go back. So if you can see the picture on the left, it says School Climate Committee. This was actually used by the district. This isn't our work here. This is what they use to promote what we're doing, but our pictures are there. So you can see that you don't know who's who, but we're there. So you can see there's parents, there's organizers, as well as district leaders and school board members, photo that they use to promote the work that we're doing. And on the page, on the image next to it that says partners, this was actually on their website, on the district website, and this is they're basically saying that that we're partners with them on something called the I3 grant, which is a pretty significant amount of money that they receive to do restorative justice practices, and I'll explain that in a second. But to be honest, we aren't really a part of that. Some of us don't feel that we're partners. We go to the School Climate Committee meeting and we're fighting to get information and fighting to get data and to collaborate. And some of these groups are collaborating more and they're actually funded, and others of us are not. So we have some questions about what partners means to them other than putting our name up on this list. So there's that. And so let me show you something else. So what we do at the School Climate Committee is basically it's an opportunity for the district, it seems, to share with us what they're doing a lot of times. And it should be more collaborative. And I'm showing you these two flyers that they created for a workshop that they had that we didn't know about until like the day before, like that week, like the week before it was going to happen. Obviously, all of this had already gone out, and we didn't have an opportunity to contribute to it at all. And from just to share from our own perspective at the LGBT Center, we do have folks there, we have staff there. We are working really hard in terms of improving school climate and welcoming schools for LGBT youth, especially trans youth, talking about gender, talking about the problems that our trans students have. Other times in the past, when there are events that they're like binary events, we've asked them, like, well, what are you doing to make sure LGBT youth are included, and that especially trans youth and gender nonconforming youth are able to access and attend these different things? And that has not gone well. And we didn't even know about this, and this is what we saw. They just brought the flyers to one of our school climate meetings, and many of us were very we found it to be lacking in it was just very binary and very limited, and so it became an issue. And the good news is that we had the School Climate Committee meeting, that they did share that with us, and that it was brought up, and even the school board member was very upset that this had all gone down without all of us being a part of what that looked like, because it was focused on the things that we're talking about. So that's an example of how our partnership needs to get better. But still, it has been, like I said, oftentimes the district telling us what they're doing, and we want it to be much more significant than that. And I think we're getting there. So I'm going back to the challenges. So we're working on some of these things. We're working on what is our mission as a school climate committee? What are our goals? How does our structure look? What does the structure look like? How does facilitation work? How do people become members? How, who gets to come to the school climate committee? So we're hopefully by like the beginning of the next school year, we'll actually have a better structure of what that looks like. It's taking some time. So those are some of the challenges. In terms of the successes, some of these are, I would say, more successes of the district, but we have been involved in this is somewhat a part of what happened because of the LCAP and because of the advocacy that we have been doing. And so I wanted to share just a few of those things. So they did hire an RJ specialist, and they also hired additional intervention workers and RJ coordinators. With the I-3 grant that they received, there are 5 people hired. Each person is a restorative justice specialist who is overseeing 5 schools. So there's 25 schools being served through that grant. And so there is a lot of work going on, and the school culture definitely is more inclusive of restorative justice. You know, I'm not sure if I said this already, but in terms of questions, we want to know, how much do the youth know about restorative justice? How much do the parents know about restorative justice? We also, the funding, specific funding around like LGBT issues has not existed yet. And it is something that we are fighting for, and that we feel is very important. But they have increased mental health supports in the district, and they have shown a very significant decrease in youth arrests and referrals to probation. They're also working now on, one of the other goals that we had was parent centers, and that's something that the parents in our group and some of the organizers are very focused on, and we've wanted to see parent center in every single school, and that's actually going to happen. So they're working on that. The other things that have been, I think, interesting is that because we're working closely with some of the district leadership, we have been able to work together and collaborate on some of their board policies and administrative regulations. And that was very specific work. So we didn't just bring some recommendations to them. We actually sat, so a couple of organizers, myself included, and some from the other organizations, and 2 assistant superintendents sat together many times to look at these board policies and administrative regulations and update them and be more inclusive of LGBT issues, of restorative justice. We were able to get some things taken out around, for example, suspending students for willful defiance. So while it's still allowed to be done, we were able to get it taken out as an option in terms of what's written down. So, you know, we've had a good influence on some of this, and the policies, I think I've attached some drafts. I looked for the updated policies, but you can have access to some of the drafts and see what some of that work has actually looked like, and see some of those changes. And so that's been, I think, pretty significant. And then we are, like I said earlier, getting a little bit more data now, and I think that's one of the next pages. So this slide here, we just saw. So this looks at the year. So it's 2015, 2016, the numbers each month of the year, showing how many students were suspended in each school in each month. So you can really start to see a pattern of what's happening in these different schools and really see where there are some big problems. So this is the kind of data that we want to see, and we're and they, I think, are finally understanding how to share that with us. So we're pleased to be able to use this and have this information. In addition, some other things that we've been able to change, and this has been, I think, very positive. They have the picture on the top left corner is a picture from their website, and that is something that didn't exist before. So we've been able to make sure that they have information for LGBT students on their district website and resources for students, parents, teachers, and others to access. And then on the right, I just wanted to share with you, this is one part of, and I have attached the whole story, a part of a study that was done thanks to California Endowment about some of the work that we've done here in Santa Ana around restorative practices. And in particular for us, it has been about really making sure that those practices are inclusive and that they highlight the unique concerns of LGBT students. So those are some of the other changes that that you can see. And like I said, I've attached that study and the policies you'll be able to access in the documents. So those are some of the positive things. And then finally, using the California Healthy Kids Survey, that's where we're doing a significant amount of work and looking at the what's happening. So our group, Education for All, basically we created our like a goal for our group and what we wanted to see in Santa Ana, which was all youth in Santa Ana are socially and emotionally healthy. And then in order to show changes and to see if we could, have some determinants of that, we used the Chicks survey because we wanted to use something that already existed. And so using the Chicks survey was the perfect opportunity. And we actually spent with parents and youth quite a long time going through every single question on the Chicks survey. We looked also at I think it's the Building Healthy Communities version, and there's a socio-emotional version and different versions. We looked at them in English, we looked at them in Spanish. And then we chose a number of Chicks questions to use as our indicators of progress. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. So I'm going to escape from here for a second so I can show you that Chicks survey data that we have been able to, with the help of a great consultant, analyze. So, and again, this is also attached, but I just wanted to show you how this panned out for us and what it looks like. We have our overall goal statement, and then our overall result statement, and then we have our goal statements. And so, for example, one goal statement is students feel they're connected to their school, and students feel hopeful. So the question in the Chicks survey, we identify where that question is, and the question is, I feel like I am part of this school. And so then we were able to see, based on a comparison of 2014, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17, and we're very lucky because Santa Ana Unified does the Chicks survey every year. Most schools, districts only do it every other year. So we are able to get this data for every year. And then thanks to our consultant, then she's taking a look at how things are doing. So you can see as I'm scrolling down that in general, the things are getting better, and except for non-traditional students, which is seems to make that would make sense, and maybe so now you can see there it gets very, very detailed, and it will not be fun for me to explain all of it on this webinar, but you can certainly take a look at the attached document to see it's very, very specific. For each Chicks question that we chose, the data has been analyzed for every year. And then it's analyzed by grade level. So you can see one of the questions that came up for us around this was, in terms of the non-traditional students, things seem to be getting worse, and we also wonder, are there more non-traditional students, and who are the non-traditional students? So it does allow us for some provide us, some things we can look into as well. So this is the way that we've used the Chicks survey. You can see, like, number 3, students feel welcomed and safe to be themselves. Some of the things that we have tried to figure out, like what does that mean? We've had long discussions about, well, what does safety mean? Does it mean safe physically? Does it mean you're safe in other ways? And so those are some of the questions that we have, but this is the way the Chicks survey is now, and we're hoping that actually we can contribute to some changes in the survey. So this is a lot of information, but it certainly will make some fun reading for any of you that like to look at data. and see for each number is our goal statement, our goal that we want to see happen. And then underneath it, it will have what question on the chick survey are we using to see if there's been progress towards that goal. So that is how we've used the chick survey. And so we've talked about all these things. So lastly, in terms of LCAP, so what we were hoping for when we first started all of this was that we would be able to make recommendations to the LCAP, and that the parents and the youth and the organizers, especially because we had the support of folks from public counsel, folks like Brian, who has been able to provide us with analysis of the LCAP and look at where things could get better based on looking at all the other LCAPs. That's been so helpful to us. And so we have wanted to contribute some of that to their LCAP. And it's not been easy, but part of it is our own learning process as well. So we have had to learn about the way their district schedule works and how timing works, and when they need information from us. I think we're getting there. So this year we were able, with Brian's help, to with the district's help, we said we really want to provide you with this recommendations, and they actually had a roundtable where, and I think they had others too, but they had one that they invited those of us who were part of the school climate committee, as well as some others from the other community members and other folks from the district. There was probably about 30 people there, and we went through each of these recommendations and hopefully, and why they were important and what is it we wanted to see. So hopefully, and ours has not come out either, our LCAP for the next year. So hopefully we'll see some of this included on the LCAP for the 2018-2019 school year. So that's about it. I know that wasn't a lot, but it's that's what we've been doing. We have a long ways to go, and but we do have this relationship now with the district, and we sit at the table with them once a month, and we when the other thing that's really great is when we have problems or issues, we can call somebody, and we have a connection to a school board member who will help address that right away. So and those are things that didn't exist before for us. So that is some of the work that we have been doing here just around the LCAP and school climate. And that's about it for me.
Hey, Laura, thank you. That was great. And Albert as well. Just looking at the question that we have, one question deals with sort of what can local advocacy organizations do, given that there's not a lot of restrictions on how districts can use the LCAP funding, and when there's attempts to get engaged by students and parents, there's a lot of pushback because there's not specific expectations of engagement of those populations. So how have you had success? What can local advocacy organizations that want to engage themselves with getting this pushback, what are good steps that they can take to be able to have the kind of opportunities that you all have been able to have in Eastside Union and Santa Ana?
I can speak. Can you all hear me still? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that what we have now did not exist before, and it exists because we created an advocacy campaign, and I think it was a very, the strategy was very, it was, a typical campaign strategy. We had a lot of people, so that there were parents and there were youth, and that was super important. It had to come from them. And they were the ones who identified what the problems look like to them and what they wanted to see and how they wanted the changes they wanted to see. And the LGBT organization is just one organization of many, so we're just a minor part of that. In fact, for us, it was about really kind of going with the bigger flow and working to make sure that it was inclusive all the time, rather than focusing specifically on LGBT issues. We focused on a larger picture, and then on inclusivity. And so it was a campaign that included finding out who your champions are in the district. Is there one school board member that is interested in working with you and your group? And can you sit with them? And then, they'll bring somebody else on board. Is there one person at the district, like a superintendent, assistant superintendent, and then of course getting to teachers and having them be part of it. So it's, it's a campaign. There was advocacy, and we are now there, and we're going to make sure that, we're doing our best, right, to keep that relationship going, so that we can, make things better. Still, the LCAP funding questions are not clearly answered for us, and we're still working on getting that information. But yeah.
Yeah, I would echo what Lauren said. I think for us, getting to the table, just like Lauren, has been a multi-year process of identifying champions, but also strong advocacy. And we're just like the only organization here. So for many years, it was really hard for us to get a delegation of board members, right? Or superintendents. So as we built those years and we've been able to build those partnerships, it has been what Lauren has said, identifying key allies and champions within our district and building with them. The Associate Superintendent of Educational Services, he was a principal at one of our high schools that we work at as of 15 years ago, right? So that's a partnership that we developed for a long time, and now that he's at the board, right, he's one of our champions, and that's how we were able to work on a partnership level. Because I think when you're working with somebody to capacity build, they don't just say, yes, open our doors, but you really have to build trust. And as far as the funding, some of the things that we've done, we definitely still work at the county level here in Santa Clara, because there's not a lot of organizations in Santa Clara County. Some of the work that we do to push for advocacy in the LCAPs comes to the county levels, as they're their approvers of LCAPs, and to push through that for more of the technical aspects of LCAP that we want. Yeah.
Great, thank you for those answers. And I'm going to read another question that was raised, which I answered online, but it's best to include it here, and maybe you guys can add to it, which was, my question is that there are some policies that exist that can support reduction of suspension and expulsions. Since districts are adopting the whole child framework, which require policy change update. So I think that my answer is that there's just a broad range of policies, from restorative practices at the LPIS to more counselors and social workers and psychologists. And then there's also barring the use of defiance disruption as grounds for suspension and expulsion, to a variety of efforts to improve school connectedness, because if you improve that, then that results in better behavior. Obviously, things like I didn't mention, but things like implicit bias training and things like that. So that's a few of the policies. I think it is so broad, the kinds of things that can reduce suspensions and expulsions. Albert or Laura or Angie, did you guys want to add anything to that?
Well, I would echo what you said, and I would add I'm not sure if I was able to provide the conduct policy that we worked on, but our goal while we worked on that conduct policy was to put in as much stuff as we could that was going to lead to a reduction of suspension. And I think it has to be multi-pronged approach, and you have to look at it from so many different angles. But the conduct policy is one way. And like Brian said, also just really trying to uplift the use of restorative practices to address problems. Those, I think that can be really, really helpful. But I would say take a look at what your school district's policies around conduct, bullying, harassment, finding out, how is your school district dealing with these things, and is there something that can be changed at the policy level, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think you all hit it on the hammer on the nail. I think, like you all said, it is like takes different approaches, especially when your district is vast and there's different communities within district boundaries. Um, and I would echo what Lauren said in the sense, looking at like the discipline policies in the matrix is super crucial, right? How are suspensions, how are they allowed, and what is the process for follow-up with students? And I think that's a great place to start, and seeing how what Brian said, really uplifting that narrative that restorative practices are working, because we see it not only in our district but other districts we work at. What they'll implement restorative justice on a one-person coordinator for a district that's super large, so 30,000 students, right? So, or whatever it is, right? So, how much, what impact can one person make in such a broad district? I'm sure they can make an impact, right? But how do we lift it to grow programs? I think that's really important. And how do we build that narrative that it's working?
Thank you for those answers. A couple more questions have appeared. One is, do community advisory boards have a say in LCAP approvals? I mean, I know that there's I'm not sure, community advisory board might be broad. I mean, there's a parents advisory committee that technically is written into the LCAP statute, as is there's an English learner advisory committee. And there's actually a formal process where they're supposed to provide input and the board is then supposed to respond to their input. That doesn't mean they have to accept the recommendations, but if they have to say which recommendations they accept, some justification, I believe. So those are two formal boards. Some districts, I think, have had student advisory boards that also can make recommendations. But to that question, do community advisory boards have a say in LCAP approvals? And of course, approval of there's a district kind of adopts an approval, an LCAP, and then the county office of education are the ones who approve the LCAP. And I think that they kind of just do things on their own at that stage. More of the input from the community is at the before the district adopts, as opposed to before somebody else approves it. But do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. And then another question was about how there's, some districts underspent their LCAPs by $300,000 or more. Does TD require them to return those funds, and how are those districts doing in terms of suspensions and expulsions? I haven't analyzed how all of those are doing on suspensions and expulsions, but I will. And that's Deborah who asked the question. I'm happy to get back to you with that. There is a lot of questions on the funds. TD does not require that any funds be returned. There's a question, I think, of if supplemental concentration funds are not used, can they be converted like the next year to just base grant funds that can be used in a broader way? And I think that's still something that some of the lawyers out there are trying to work out, trying to restrict the use of that, that rollover into much broader purposes. I don't think that there's absolute clear answer, but I think that the district, even if you don't spend all the money in your LCAP, you do hold on to those dollars. And there might be some point in time where you have to return things, but not each year. There's not that kind of accounting. That's my understanding. I think that folks at public advocates, and maybe some folks at public counsel, might have a better understanding of all those dynamics. I'll open that. I don't know, Angie, if you have anything to add to that.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you, Brian.
Okay. And I think, as I noted, there are about 7 districts underspent by as much as $300,000. Granted, some of those were going to spend $4 million, and they only spent $3.7 million. And sometimes they said it's because it took a while to get the trainers on. But sometimes it's really.
And you can share the list of those districts with us.
I'm happy to share the list of those districts. I can't do it at the very moment because I don't have it written down in front of me. I do have it written down somewhere.
Very curious.
Yeah. So I can share that afterwards. So I'm trying to see if there's any other questions, but I don't think that any other questions have occurred. If people do have other questions, I think when Public Counsel, and Angie, thank you so much, and all Public Counsel for helping facilitate all of this and your whole series of webinars. when you send out information, I think I believe each of us would be happy for you to send out our contact information. So if people want to address us, reach out to us directly with questions. We are more than happy to respond. Isn't that nice of me to speak for Albert and Laura as well? But with that, unless there's any further questions, I just want to thank everyone for participating. For those who are listening later, we appreciate you listening in. And thanks to Laura and Albert for your great work that you're doing at the local level and your willingness to share. And Angie, is there anything that you want to close up with?
No, thank you so much to all the presenters. We'll go ahead and send out an email shortly within the next few weeks with all of the materials. They're also in the sidebar if you'd like to download them now. And if you have questions that you'd like for us to forward to the presenters, you can email us and we'll be sure to get those to the presenters as well.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Laura, Albert, any last words, Laura or Albert?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Okay, thank you all.
All right,
Bye-bye.
have a good one. Bye.